The rain hit the windows of my apartment in a steady rhythm, the kind of sound that's almost soothing if you let it. I sat alone at the dining table, finishing the last bite of my meal. It had been a long day, filled with design meetings, product specs, and deadlines I didn't care to remember. I had a bit of free time for once, no emails demanding immediate attention, no projects that needed my constant involvement. Just silence. I could enjoy the quiet. Laura, my wife of 5 years, was supposed to be home by now. I had already gotten a message from her about an hour ago, letting me know she'd be late due to a work event. Her role as the marketing director at a tech company meant these things were inevitable. I wasn't surprised. Honestly, I was used to her late nights, her long hours. It had become routine, something I barely gave a second thought to anymore. But tonight, for some reason, it felt different. There was an odd unease creeping up on me, and I couldn't place why. Around 10 p.m., just as I was settling into the couch with a drink, my phone rang. It was Jake, my best friend since college. He usually didn't call me at this hour unless it was something important, or urgent. "Hey man, what's up?" I answered, trying to sound casual, though my pulse quickened slightly. "I just saw Laura," Jake said, his voice sounding uneasy. I sat up, the drink halfway to my lips. "What? Where?" "At that restaurant on 5th Avenue. She's with some guy, Ryan. I didn't want to call you until I was sure, but I'm pretty sure that was her. They looked really cozy together." My mind raced. I felt the first waves of panic sweep through me, but I did my best to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure? Maybe it wasn't her." "No man, it was her. I recognized her face. And the guy. I don't know who he is, but it didn't look like they were just catching up." I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not to me. Not to Laura and me. We'd been married for 5 years, and though we had our ups and downs, I never expected something like this. "I'll look into it," I said, hanging up without another word. I sat there for a while, the silence of the apartment weighing on me. There was a strange feeling in my chest, an ache I hadn't felt before. Betrayal. Doubt. It was a gut feeling, one I couldn't ignore. But I didn't act on impulse. I could have stormed over to that restaurant, confronted her, made a scene. But no. That would solve nothing. I needed answers first. I couldn't let emotions dictate my next move. I spent the rest of the night trying to distract myself. I watched TV, scrolled through social media, did everything I could to ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. But as the hours ticked by, the reality of what Jake had said loomed larger. What if he was right? What if Laura had been seeing someone else behind my back? It was around midnight when I finally convinced myself to go to bed. I lay in the dark, wide awake, my thoughts spinning in every direction. The rain outside had softened, but my mind was far from calm. Was it true? Was my marriage truly unraveling in ways I never could have imagined? I thought of the years we'd spent together, the late-night talks, the vacations, the quiet moments where we had laughed and shared our dreams. Could that all be a lie? Could it all be built on something fragile, something that could break at any moment? I didn't have answers. I only had questions. The next morning came too soon. I woke up early, my body exhausted from lack of sleep, but my mind sharp, alert, and anxious. Laura hadn't come home yet. I didn't know if that was a good or bad sign. But something told me I wouldn't get the answers I needed from her phone calls or texts. I needed to hear the truth from her. She eventually arrived home around noon, looking the same as she always did, careful, composed, her hair perfectly in place, a slight smile on her face. The kind of smile that seemed almost practiced, like she'd been wearing it all night long, even when I wasn't around to see it. "Hey," she greeted, hanging up her coat and slipping off her shoes. "Sorry, I'm so late. The event ran long. How was your night? It was the first question, the first moment of normalcy. I wanted to believe everything was fine. But I couldn't. Not after what Jake had told me. I took a deep breath and asked, Laura, do you think our relationship is okay? Are we doing well? She froze for a second, almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. The way her eyes flicked away before meeting mine again. The subtle tension in her jaw. Of course, she replied, too quickly. Why wouldn't we be? I didn't push her yet. I wasn't ready to confront her directly. But I could feel the distance growing between us, the walls she was putting up. I needed to know the truth, not just from her words, but from her actions. So I kept my voice calm, even as the anger started to rise inside me. If you're feeling stressed with work, we can talk about it, I said, keeping my tone neutral. But, Laura, if there's more going on here, we need to address it. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I don't feel like it is. She hesitated again. I could tell she didn't like where this conversation was heading, but she tried to keep it together. I'm just tired, Ryan. The pressure at work is getting to me. It's nothing personal. Really? I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. But I knew something was off. I could feel it deep down. I didn't need her to tell me what Jake had seen, I already knew. If you're feeling that way, I said quietly, maybe we need some space. Laura's eyes widened. She immediately shook her head. No, Ryan. No. I don't want space. We're fine. But I wasn't so sure anymore. I had already made up my mind. I didn't want to be in a relationship built on lies. I didn't want to be someone's fool. I knew, without a doubt, that it was time to end things. Time to let go. And so, I said the words that changed everything. I think we need to get a divorce. She froze, the shock in her eyes clear. But I couldn't bring myself to apologize. Not now. We'd already reached the point of no return. The days following my decision felt like a blur. It was as if everything around me had turned into a slow-motion replay, each moment dragging on longer than it should. Laura was silent for the most part. She went to work, came home, did everything as usual, except now, there was an underlying tension in the air that couldn't be ignored. She didn't argue with me. She didn't beg me to change my mind. It was as though she knew, deep down, that it was already over. I didn't expect it to feel easy, but it was like an enormous weight had been lifted from my chest. The heaviness that had built up over the last few months, maybe even longer, had started to fade. I found myself breathing easier, even though I still didn't have all the answers. Why had she done it? Was it just a one-time mistake? Was I not enough for her? These questions haunted me, but I wasn't ready to face them yet. I needed space to breathe, to think, and to process everything. It was difficult to find the right time to speak to her again. There was a part of me that wanted to confront her, to yell, to demand answers. But something inside me knew it wouldn't help. I had already made my decision. What difference would it make if I raged against the truth? The truth was already here, and it was undeniable. I started to focus on my work more, throwing myself into the projects that had been waiting for my attention. I designed, created, and spent hours in front of my computer, pushing aside the thoughts of Laura and what had happened. I needed to move forward, to start over. The world felt different now, and in some ways, it felt smaller. I wasn't just her husband anymore, I was a man standing alone, figuring out what came next. Laura, however, didn't seem to know how to deal with it. I watched her go through the motions, her normal routine, her carefully crafted smile when she left for work each day. But when she came home, she would retreat into herself. I could tell something had changed in her as well, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. Was she grieving? Was she feeling guilty? Or had she already moved on? I couldn't tell, and it frustrated me. One evening, a week after I had told her I wanted a divorce, I came home early. I had just finished a late meeting at work, and there she was, sitting in the living room, staring at her phone. Her eyes looked hollow, distant. For a brief moment, I wondered if she was even the same person I had married. The woman who had once been full of energy, ambition, and love now seemed to have lost herself in the aftermath of the choices she'd made. "Laura," I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. "I think it's time we talk. Not about us, because I've already made my decision, but about what happens next. About the divorce." She looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. Her lips pressed together into a thin line, and for a moment, she didn't speak. I could feel the air between us thick with unspoken words. "I know," she finally said, her voice soft but steady. "I've been trying to figure out how to handle this, how to handle everything. But I don't know where to start." I sat down across from her, keeping my distance. I wasn't angry anymore, though a small part of me still felt betrayed. I wasn't sure what I was looking for in this conversation, but I needed it to be real. No more pretending. "It's not about where we start anymore, Laura," I said, shaking my head. "It's about where we end." She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I'm sorry, Ryan. I never meant for it to get to this point. I never meant for you to find out, like this." I wanted to tell her that it was too late for apologies, that her actions had already set everything in motion. But instead, I simply said, "I know." And then, we sat in silence. The days that followed were filled with logistical arrangements and emotional distance. We were still living together, but only barely. We didn't eat dinner together anymore, didn't exchange pleasantries. The house, which once felt like a shared space, now felt like a place we both occupied, but not together. I had already started moving out some of my things, slowly, piece by piece, as I prepared for the next chapter of my life. Laura was doing the same. I didn't want to think about her and the other man. I didn't want to imagine what it had been like for her with him. What was it about him that I couldn't offer? What did she find in him that she couldn't find in me? But in the back of my mind, I knew those were the wrong questions to ask. It wasn't about him, or even about her. It was about us, and what we had become. Our marriage had become a lie, and no matter how much I wished it had ended differently, I knew there was no turning back. The paperwork for the divorce was finalized quickly. Too quickly, in some ways. We were both professionals, both eager to move forward and end this chapter of our lives. But there was a strange kind of emptiness in that finality. No fights, no messy arguments, just the cold efficiency of paperwork. The first time I saw Laura after everything was finalized, she looked lost. She was standing in the kitchen, looking out the window, her arms folded across her chest. There was something in her posture that struck me, something vulnerable, something I hadn't seen in years. "Are you okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. She turned slowly, meeting my eyes. "I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Ryan." I didn't have the answers for her. I didn't know how to fix things that had already been broken. I only knew one thing: I couldn't fix it. And neither could she. "I think we both need to find a way forward," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "For both of us." And with that, I left the room, leaving her alone in the kitchen, staring out the window. The weeks that followed felt strangely empty. There were no arguments, no late-night conversations where we tried to piece together what had gone wrong. Instead, there was just a quiet, almost eerie routine. I continued going to work, throwing myself into my projects as if they could erase the gnawing feeling in my chest. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into her own world. She was still going through the motions, leaving for work, coming home, and occasionally speaking to me. But it was clear that the woman I had once known was no longer the same. She didn't ask me about my day anymore, and I didn't ask her either. I didn't care, not the way I used to. There were moments when I felt a flicker of sympathy for her, especially when I saw her sitting alone, staring at the television or quietly scrolling through her phone. But then I reminded myself, this was her doing. She had broken us. Not me. The silence in our home was suffocating. It felt like we were both trying to outrun the reality of what had happened, but there was no escape. I had made my decision, and the weight of that decision was slowly sinking in. It was a strange kind of freedom, though, one that came at a steep price. But there was no going back. No second chances. Not for us. One night, a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I found myself alone in the living room, flipping through old photos on my phone. The familiar faces, the vacations, the moments of joy we had shared, felt like a lifetime ago. I thought about the life I used to have, the life I had imagined we'd continue to build together. And then I thought about the life ahead of me, one without Laura. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew it had to be better than the lie I had been living. The following Monday, I received an email from HR. I had been offered a new opportunity within the company, an overseas assignment in Tokyo. It was an offer I had heard whispers about for months, but I never thought it would actually come through. Now that it had, I was faced with a choice. I could stay in Seattle, in the place that had been home, surrounded by reminders of a life I was trying to forget. Or I could leave, start fresh, far away from everything that had once felt so familiar. I didn't even hesitate. I replied to the email, accepting the offer. I needed the distance. I needed to rebuild myself, away from the shadows of my past. In the weeks leading up to my departure, I made the necessary arrangements. I found a new apartment in Tokyo, packed up my belongings, and said goodbye to friends and family. As much as I tried to avoid it, there was one last conversation I had to have, with Laura. She had been distant, but the truth was, I had avoided her as much as she had avoided me. It wasn't until I started packing up the last of my things that I realized just how little we had left to say to each other. Still, I couldn't leave without acknowledging what had happened between us. I owed it to both of us to close the chapter properly, if that was even possible. One evening, as I was preparing to leave for the airport the next morning, I found her sitting on the couch. She was looking out the window, her face unreadable. "Laura," I said, my voice quiet, but firm. "I'm leaving tomorrow. For Tokyo. I just wanted to let you know." She didn't turn to face me, but I could tell she had heard me. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence before she spoke, her voice low. "Are you really leaving?" "Just like that?" she asked, still not looking at me. "Yeah," I replied. "I have to. I can't stay here. Not anymore." Finally, she turned to face me. Her eyes were tired, heavy, and there was something in them, guilt, regret, or maybe even sorrow. I couldn't tell. "I never meant for this to happen, Ryan. I never meant for it to end this way." I looked at her for a long moment, the woman I had once loved, the woman I thought I knew. There was a time when I might have felt sorry for her, but not anymore. The truth was too painful. I had given her my trust, my heart, and she had betrayed both. And now, here we were, both trying to move on in our own ways. "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But it happened. We can't change it now." She nodded, as if accepting that there was no going back. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Ryan. I really do." I wasn't sure if she meant it. It didn't matter. I didn't need her approval anymore. I had learned the hard way that sometimes, the only way forward is to leave the past behind. I picked up my suitcase, the last of my belongings packed neatly, ready to begin this new chapter. "Goodbye, Laura," I said, turning toward the door. "Goodbye, Ryan," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. And just like that, I was gone. As the plane took off the next day, heading east toward Tokyo, I felt a strange sense of peace. The city below me grew smaller and smaller, fading into a sea of lights and clouds. I was leaving everything behind, Laura, the betrayal, the years of my life that had been wasted. But I wasn't sad. Not anymore. I was starting over. And that was enough. Tokyo was everything I had imagined and more. The city felt alive, pulsating with energy, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost suffocating stillness I had left behind in Seattle. The neon lights illuminated the streets with an intensity one hadn't seen before, and the sheer speed of the city matched the pace at which my life seemed to be moving now. There was no room for hesitation, no time for lingering on the past. Tokyo was a place for reinvention, a place for new beginnings, and that's exactly what I needed. In the early days after my arrival, everything felt foreign. I struggled with the language, the customs, even the food. Simple tasks, like ordering coffee or navigating the subway system, became small victories, each step forward pushing me further from the life I had left behind. But, in a strange way, that made it easier to forget. It wasn't the same as starting over in Seattle, where I would still be surrounded by memories of Laura, of everything that had once been. Here, I was invisible. There were no lingering questions, no glances exchanged in public spaces. It was just me, starting fresh in a city that didn't know my name, and I liked it that way. At work, things were just as chaotic as I expected. The new position was a challenge, but it was the kind of challenge I welcomed. I threw myself into my projects, determined to prove myself in this new environment. I wasn't just rebuilding my personal life, I was rebuilding my professional life as well. The rhythm of work, the fast-paced environment, and the constant drive for success distracted me, filling my time and giving me something tangible to focus on. But even in this whirlwind, there were moments when the past would creep up on me. Late at night, when the city outside my apartment went quiet, I would find myself alone with my thoughts, and in those moments, Laura's face would appear, unbidden. I'd wonder what she was doing, if she was moving on with her life, or if she still thought about me. Those thoughts were like shards of glass, sharp, painful, and impossible to ignore. But I knew better than to indulge them. The past was behind me now, and I had to keep moving forward. One evening, several weeks after my move, I received a message from Jake. It had been a while since we last spoke, and when I saw his name pop up on my screen, I hesitated for a moment before opening it. "Hey man, how's everything going in Tokyo? Hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking about you. Call me when you get a chance." I stared at the message for a while, weighing the decision. I hadn't spoken to anyone from back home since I left. Not even my parents. I had told myself I needed space from everything, but now, sitting alone in my small Tokyo apartment, I realized that maybe I needed something more. A connection. A link to the past, just to hear a familiar voice, even if only for a moment. I dialed Jake's number. "Ryan," he answered, his voice full of relief. "I've been worried about you, man. How are you holding up?" I leaned back on the couch, running a hand through my hair. "I'm fine. Really. Work is good, Tokyo's intense, but I'm adjusting. It's a change, that's for sure." "That's good to hear," Jake replied. "Listen, I don't want to bring this up if you're not ready to talk about it, but I've heard some things back home. About Laura." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Jake sighed. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but I think you deserve to know. Laura, she's been struggling. Her work is taking a hit, man. People are talking about her, and not in the way she'd want. The whole thing with you and the divorce, it's becoming a bigger deal than she thought. Her reputation at work is in jeopardy." I didn't know how to feel. A part of me wanted to feel vindicated, to feel like she was getting what she deserved. But another part of me, some part that I didn't want to admit existed, felt a pang of sympathy for her. It wasn't that I was still in love with her, or that I wanted to go back. No, I had moved on from all of that. But hearing that she was suffering, hearing that the consequences of her actions were piling up, left me with a strange sense of guilt. I guess she's paying the price for it, I said quietly, trying to mask my emotions. Yeah, Jake agreed, his voice softer now. But I just wanted you to know, Ryan. I'm not trying to make things harder on you. I just thought you should know what's going on. You know, in case you ever wanted to reach out. I didn't know what to say. The old me would have felt guilty for leaving her like that, for cutting ties so abruptly. But the new me, the one who had started fresh in Tokyo, who had carved out a new life, didn't feel that pull anymore. I had made my peace with it. I appreciate you telling me, I said, the words feeling more final than I intended. But I'm good, man. I'm moving on. I'm happy with where I am now. All right, Jake replied, sounding a little unsure. Just wanted to check in. Take care of yourself, okay? And don't be a stranger. I won't, I promised. Thanks, Jake. The call ended, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen of my phone. Jake was right about one thing, Laura's world was crumbling. I wasn't sure if that gave me any closure or if it just opened up new wounds. But I couldn't change the past. All I could do was focus on the present. I had left Seattle for a reason. To escape. To start over. And now, in Tokyo, I was finally living the life I had been searching for. The future was uncertain, but that was okay. It was mine to shape. And as the night wore on and the city outside buzzed with life, I realized something important: I was finally free.